Good morning, Kentucky. It's another Monday in the bluegrass. It's your old pal, Dr. Brislin here, for our weekly live cooking demo coming to you. We're all being healthy at home here still, working remotely, coming to you from the north side of Lexington. I'm not sure what part of town our other folks today live in, but we've got an exciting change up today. So we've been learning from Chef T every week. Last week we did kohlrabi, we've done strawberries, we've done asparagus. That one was amazing. Turnips, radishes. We've been covering all of the seasonal produce that you may be getting at the farmer's market or in your CSA share, or maybe you go to an independent grocer that carries some local produce. We featured lamb one week. That was amazing. Maybe you've got your favorite local farmer that gets you your animal proteins. And we wanted to switch it up this week, both to give Chef Tanya a little break, but also to let you all know some of the other things we do at the Food Connection. So a lot of my work is working and bringing local food to our campus dining facilities, and we are starting to plan for the fall, and we're excited to continue our whole animal program and our salad bar program. And another piece that you all might not know that we work on is local grains. So for the past year, myself and Dr. Jacobson, who is Krista Jacobson's our faculty chair, have been working on some small grain projects. So looking at wheat, barley, rye, how to adapt it to grow in Kentucky, and what we can learn to make from it from there. So our extension associate, Bryan Brady, who normally does a big piece of his work is working with farmers to help them get their food safety audits to sell to campus and to sell into wholesale chains. He also knows a ton about wheat, maybe too much. So I might have to wrangle him in a little bit today. But part of his master's research was on looking at wheat grown in Kentucky for bread. And who doesn't love a good carb? Who doesn't love to carbo load, even if you're not running a marathon? So today we're going to look at how, and I know a lot of people have been baking like crazy during our quarantine moments. So that's what we're going to feature today. And also some fun ways to use a product in your CSA share. And so let's bring in the one and only Bryan Brady. Hello. Hi. Look at me over here. So Bryan's having to learn the magic of TV at home moments. He's got 2 screens set up. How's it going, Bryan?
Good. It's going good. I'm excited to share this focaccia recipe with everybody.
So what are we making today?
So today we're making focaccia, which, and it's a no-knead, no mixer focaccia. I think that gives a little bit more access for everybody. And it's a relatively simple process. There's a little bit of flexibility in it, but again, it is bread and it takes time. You have to ferment it and all that stuff. So,
lots of downtime though, right? There's a little bit of activity and then a lot of waiting, which exactly. I'm good at.
Lots of downtime and then flexibility. We're basically going to make the dough and then we're going to put it in the fridge to ferment. And that gives you flexibility. It's not a 12 hours in the fridge. It's overnight or up to 3 days.
Hey, I like this.
Yeah, so you get some flexibility with it. And there's also some advantages to doing it in the fridge. You put it in the fridge, you slow fermentation down, enzymes go to work, and you get better tasting bread. So, there's advantages to it.
And are we going to put anything on the focaccia?
Yes. So to keep with the theme, using local CSA ingredients that you might get, we're making a spring greens pesto to go with it. And when I say spring greens, I pretty much mean anything that you would generally cook. So like mustard greens, turnip greens, maybe some collards, kale, anything like that. Anything that comes from your CSA share. You know, sometimes you get the collective term like braising greens. And so, it's instead of using sweet basil, that's what we're going to use.
So if you're drowning in greens and you keep getting them in your weekly share and you're like, what am I supposed to do with these? Pesto, awesome option.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
You know, you can use it on more than just focaccia. You can throw it in some, throw it in rice, throw it in pasta, throw it in gnocchi, whatever.
Yeah.
Good on everything. So.
We have your recipe I think, and it's all ready and it's posted to the Food Connection website. Our trusty sidekick, Bethany, is in the background. I think she's probably going to post it in the chat. Thank you to everyone who's joining us. And okay, let's get started. Step one, let's make some dough. I'll let you in there.
Okay, I want to show you the mixing process just because, you know, I want to show you how simple this actually is. There is no kneading to this, and I'm serious when I say that. So a couple of things. I've got flour over here. Now in the recipe, you'll see I've got volume and weight. If you're going to get serious about baking bread, I highly recommend getting a scale. But we still have volume over here, so we can do that too. So this is 800 grams of flour, and it can be bread flour or AP flour, preferably bread flour. I know flour is hard to come by right now. Everybody, like you said, everybody's baking. It's been difficult to find flour. If you use, there's a couple of notes in the recipe. If you use AP flour, you're going to want to cut back the olive oil just a little bit because there will be, you develop less gluten with AP flour, and olive oil inhibits gluten formation. So if you cut it back, then you kind of get something similar to using bread flour. However, we live in a soft wheat area. Not all AP flours are created the same. So don't use Weisenberger or Gold Medal or White Lily AP flour. That stuff's for making biscuits, and they make amazing biscuits, but that will not make a good bread. So you're looking more at like King Arthur or maybe the local store brand AP flour. So anyways, 800 grams of flour. Then we have salt, and we're going to whisk that in to the flour just to evenly distribute it. You know, no actual mixing process going on here. Okay, and then we have about 20 ounces of water here, or 2.5 cups. And I've got instant yeast weighed out here. Now, this is kind of an important distinction, what type of yeast that you use. And another thing, I know yeast was actually hard to find at the beginning of everybody staying home as well, but it's out there again now. It's out there on Amazon, and you can buy it a pound at a time. Instant yeast will last forever. Active dry yeast doesn't last all that long, so I would recommend buying the pound packs of instant yeast for about $5 to $10. You can get it delivered via Amazon, or you know, any other mail order site. Cool thing about instant yeast, you don't have to heat the water up. You just add it straight to the water. And then I'm going to whisk that in to distribute it a little bit. Okay, and then we also have about 50 grams or 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And I'm going to add that into the water. Now, this is room temp water. If your tap's coming out cold this time of year, you might want to microwave the water for like 10 seconds to get it up to like 70 degrees. Because if you got, you know, groundwater or whatever your water's coming in at like 50 degrees, then the olive oil might clump up a little bit when you add it to the flour. So that's a little pro tip there. So we'll whisk this, just kind of evenly distribute it. And then we're actually going to go flour into the liquid. I like doing that because then you don't have a bunch of flour stuck on the bottom of the bowl. And then just a spatula or a spoon, and we're just going to mix this into like a shaggy mass. We're not looking for anything smooth. We're going to use the flour's ability to develop gluten on its own instead of forcing it with a mixer. And you know, this is a we're going to do a half sheet pan, which is 18 inches by 13 inches, and this is a lot of dough. So if you do have a smaller stand mixer, this would stress it out. So actually having the no knead function, I think this is definitely better and easier.
Hey, Bryan, your mom is watching. I just wanted you to know. Hi, Mom.
Excellent. So all we're doing is just getting it to the point where there's really no more dry flour left. we're just about there. You kind of give it a couple jabs to any of those little, like I said, sometimes little pieces of olive oil. But as this dough ferments, it'll all mix in. There's nothing to really worry about. And at this point, believe it or not, we can just set it aside. Make sure we get everything off the spatula. Put a damp towel or some plastic wrap over it. And I'm going to set this aside for a little bit. And then we'll come back to it and I'll show you the next process that we're going to do, which is called stretching and folding. And that'll help us develop the gluten. But, you know, mixing is one way to develop gluten in bread. But adding water to flour is all you really need to actually develop gluten. So, like I said, we're going to take advantage of that. I'm going to step off camera real quick and just put some plastic over this. And then we will come back to that.
Just a reminder to all of our viewers, if you have questions for Bryan, feel free to put them in the chat box and I pop in and I'm your proxy here. So any questions, we're glad to hear them.
Okay, so we're going to kind of skip a step while we wait for that dough to kind of relax and hydrate and get to the folding process. I'm going to show you what is kind of like the third paragraph of this is after you bulk fermented your dough in the fridge and you're ready to make it. The first thing you're going to do, take it out of the fridge. And I've got my dough right here. You can see all this beautiful fermentation right here. So, first step, and this seems crazy, but this is a quarter cup of olive oil. You've already put some olive oil on the dough. The reality is focaccia, the beauty of focaccia is that it is essentially a flatbread that's kind of like shallow fried in olive oil. And you definitely need this olive oil to prevent sticking. Now, I also have parchment on here too. That's just kind of a, that's just kind of a safeguard to try to keep it from sticking. You don't really need the parchment if you're going to use a quarter cup of olive oil. Now, what I'm going to do is pour about 3 tablespoons. A quarter cup is 4 tablespoons, so I'm going to pour about 3 tablespoons onto this sheet tray, and then save 1 tablespoon to pour over the top. So yeah, we'll just pour this on. That's about a tablespoon left over. And then we'll kind of get in here, spread it around. Okay. So this is a dough scraper or something. If you're really going to get into the bread, you might want to grab. But you could also use the same thing, rubber spatula like this to get the dough out. Or, now that I've got olive oil in my hands, I could really get in here and probably roll it out with just the olive oil in my hands. So let me get in here with the dough scraper. Get our dough out. All right, right in the middle of the pan.
So how long has that been? How long has that dough you're working with been sitting in the fridge or fermenting?
This is actually, I made this last night, so not even, I would say, what time is it? I'd say about 14 hours.
Okay, so you did the first step, you did the folding, which you're about to show us, and then you stuck it in the fridge, and then this is what came out. Okay.
Exactly.
This is really satisfying to watch, Bryan, I have to say. I'm not sure why, but I'm really enjoying this.
Okay. All right, olive oil over the top. Get your fingers kind of, so this is the classic focaccia dimpling. First thing you want to do is kind of deflate it because it's obviously heavily fermented. And when you deflate it, you're kind of redistributing the yeast, giving it more stuff, giving it more food to eat. And it'll reinflate like this is called the proofing process. What was happening in the fridge is the bulk fermentation process. This is proofing, which is what happens usually after you shape bread and then you let it proof. Focaccia, we're not really shaping it, which is another reason why this recipe is easy and kind of a good beginner step. So we're going to kind of flatten it out, and then we're going to get in here from the center and kind of dimple out towards the corners. And it's not going to fill the whole pan the first time. Because you're messing with, I'm messing with it. I pulled it out. I'm kind of reactivating those gluten strands, and it's going to fight you a little bit. So that's why this dimpling process you're going to have to do a couple of times. So gently stretch. Don't fight it too much. Don't tear the dough. That's probably about as far as it's going to go this first time. About there. And so this usually takes about 2 or 3 times, probably 3. I'll set this aside for about 15, 20 minutes, and then I'll come back and do the same thing. You don't need to get, like, there's going to be a bunch of olive oil out here. Just dip your fingers in it. Cover it in plastic or cover it with a damp towel. Or if you got another sheet tray that's exactly the same size, flip it over the top. And yeah, let me wipe my hands real quick, and then I'll set this aside.
You've got a whole fan club watching you, Bryan.
Huh?
You've got a whole fan club. Dave Glickman is real excited to see you.
That's great. These are all my Virginia Beach people. Okay, so we can, at this point, I think we can go back to the dough that we pre-made, just to at least show. I would probably let this sit a little bit longer, but I do want to show what the stretch and fold technique is. So what this stretch and fold does, and you can see.
Hey, Bryan, can you scooch about 4 inch? There you go. Perfect.
You can see that the dough is actually developed enough to not even really tear at this point, just by sitting there and hydrating. So one thing I forgot here is let me grab a little bowl of water. Because while you might think flour is what you would use to keep this from sticking to your hands, this is a wet dough. And if I add flour to it, it's just going to get absorbed by the dough, and my hand's going to stick a couple of turns in. Which the wetter the dough is, you want to use water, believe it or not, to keep this from sticking to your hands. So I've got a little bowl of water here, and I'll dip my hands in it. And you kind of come in here and get under the dough and stretch it, and then fold it over. And then you'll turn it 90 degrees. And you see the dough's not sticking to my hands. Hold the bowl a little bit, stretch it, and you can see it's actually more difficult to stretch it that second time I do it. Because the dough's starting to fight back a little bit, develop some gluten. Then I'll get in here again, stretch it, flip it over. And then this next time, it's not even really going to stretch because it's already kind of coming together. What I'll do is just kind of roll it over into a ball. And then, so that's step one. You can already see it looks a lot more like dough than when I first pulled it over here. And now what I'll do is I'll put plastic wrap on it again. And then set it aside for another 15, 20 minutes or so. And then we'll do it again. Same thing. And you're going to do that probably 3 to 4 times. And that'll get you to about probably about an hour. And you'll want to kind of take note of where the dough is. If it's double in size already in an hour, then it's time to oil up a container like I had the dough in, like, a nice plastic container like this, or a metal bowl, or a ceramic bowl. Oil, put a little bit of oil in it, rub it around with your hands, put the dough in, cover it with a couple layers of plastic wrap, or something like this has a top, and put it in the fridge. And you want to put it in the fridge for at least overnight, but you can leave it in there for up to 3 days before you take it out. And each successive time you do one of those stretch and folds, the dough will get smoother, and the gluten will develop. And by the time you're ready to put it in a container, you'll see, it's going to still be sticky because it's a higher hydration dough. But again, a bowl of water next to you is your friend. It will keep the dough from sticking to your hands. Don't be afraid of, the dough being wet. Whatever you do, don't add more flour. So yeah, that's really all you do to develop the dough is just some stretch and folds over the course of an hour. So, and then, you go straight into that process that I just showed you, stretching, dimpling this out. And this is still ready to stretch even more at this point. So a couple of
Bryan,
thoughts about, we're not going to get to the point in
Bryan,
30 minutes where we. Sorry,
how do you know when you're done doing this part?
This part?
How do you know when you've dimpled and stretched it enough?
Yeah, so it will pretty much get right here to about right here to the corner of the pan. It will fill the whole pan out. Once you get to the point where you fill the whole pan out, like this recipe is for this 18 by 13 size pan. Now,
okay.
A little bit of a note on that without like nerding out too much, and this is all stuff that you guys should know how to do. 18 times 13 is the area of this pan. If you've got a pan if you got a cake pan that's 10 inches round, figure out the area, We gotta see Lily rolling her eyes.
What are we doing? Figure out the area of your pan and then what?
Pi r squared. No, anyways, so if you've got something that's 17 by 12, multiply that number, divide it by the 18 by 13 that the recipe's for, and then you got to factor and multiply the recipe for. Or you can just not do that, end up with either yeah, or you could totally not do that and end up either with a thinner or thicker focaccia. So, anyways,
all right,
after you've stretched it out, let's just go back to Lily's.
All right,
after you stretched it out about 3 times, that's about as far as it's going to go, 3 or 4. So, anyways, another pro tip here is that you're going to cook this in a 500 degree oven. You're going to knock it down to 450 when it goes in the oven, but that's hot. And so this oil is going to, it's basically going to fry the dough. Depending on how far you get the dough stretched out, you kind of have these puddles of oil in the corner. Dab those with a paper towel and kind of get some of it out of there, because what you don't want is for that stuff to splatter and hit the bottom of your oven and smoke up. But another thing you can do is put a big piece of foil on the bottom of the oven. If you have a pizza stone or a baking steel or even an inverted sheet pan, put that in the oven as it preheats. And then when you put this focaccia in the oven, you want to put that on top of that hot object, either a stone, baking steel, inverted sheet pan. And that heat will hit the bottom of this pan, help you get oven spring, but it will also help you get an awesome brown, crispy crust on the bottom. And let me show you the one that we've already got baked here. So here's a very plain focaccia. It's got some chunky sea salt on it. Did this because we're going to top it with the spring green pesto that we're going to make. But yeah, this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a brown bottom. Nice crispy brown bottom there. So that, either that inverted sheet pan or baking steel or stone is going to help you get that nice brown bottom. And then, other things you can do if you're not going to top it with a spring pesto, if you just want to make focaccia, like if you got some fresh rosemary in your garden, put that on top. I sprinkle the sea salt on right before this goes into the oven. Fresh rosemary on that, and that's like perfect focaccia. You can do a lot of things with this. You can see the thickness of it. And if you cut it and then cut it this way, you can make sandwiches out of it. And I'll show you, we're going to cut it and mess around with it after we make this pesto. But I think it's probably a good time to get onto the pesto. So,
we joked before today that, as you can tell, Bryan is a wellspring of knowledge of anything gluten related. And we're like, I don't know how we're going to contain him to just 1 hour here, but you're doing very well, Bryan, even if I didn't want to calculate the square of my cake pan. That looks so delicious.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see this pesto.
I mean, and you can tell how light it is too, because we did that long fermentation. That's half air, half bread. So, so the spring greens pesto is what I have here is so our family does the UK CSA, and this week we got some kale, and we also had some braising greens. So that was a mix of like different mustard greens this week, like Mizuna and tatsoi and just really delicious stuff. And so what I did was, and I do this for two reasons. I blanched about one bunch. Because I mixed it, I took about half the bunch of kale and half the braising green bag. But in a stock pot, a lot of salt in there. I boiled it for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then you scoop it out into a bowl of ice water. And that does two things. It sets the color, gives you this beautiful, vibrant green, and then it also stops the cooking because you don't really want to cook these, to death. You really just want to cook them for 30 seconds to a minute. And that'll kind of take out some of the bitterness. And it depends on what recipe you're using, where you want to accent that bitterness with spring greens. But in this case, we kind of wanted to dull it down just a little bit because the olive oil that's going to go into the pesto is bitter as well. So I've got a food processor over here, and we can do this in a blender as well. So I'm going to dump these greens in here, spread them around. And then
Can you pull that food processor over any further, Bryan, or is that as far out as it goes?
Oh, no. Here, let me just do this. There we go. Okay. And then I've got, so with pesto, you can use, well, first off, pesto can be anything. And I think it just translates to sauce in Italian. And the one that we're all familiar with is the Genovese pesto. That's pine nuts and Parmesan and garlic and olive oil and basil. In this case, we're going to use almonds because it's what I had. So I took 2 tablespoons of almonds and I toasted them in a 350-degree toaster oven for like 8-9 minutes. Make sure you set a timer when you're toasting nuts because they burn very easily. And once they're burnt, they're done for. You can't use them. So we'll dump these in here. And then I've got 1 clove of garlic minced. And it's just kind of roughly minced. You really could just rough chop this too because this is obviously the food processor is going to do the mincing. So we'll spread the garlic around. There. And then I have a cup of Parmesan cheese. And you really want to hold off on the cheese right now. And then let's see, put the top on, and we're going to kind of pulse this a little bit. Okay, now once you get it kind of broken up like that, I'm going to turn it on. And I'm going to start by adding, and this is something that we might need to adjust in the recipe, but I'm going to add a little bit of canola oil as this blade runs. And here's another like nerd fact. The reason I'm doing this is because if you add olive oil, particularly good extra virgin olive oil, to a food processor blade that's running, it will break it up into these tiny little pieces that expose a chemical that makes it super bitter. So in order to avoid that, I'm going to turn this on, and then I'm going to turn it into kind of an emulsification with regular canola oil that doesn't have any flavor. It's pretty neutral in flavor. And then once I get that emulsified, then I'll put it in this bowl over here, and then I'll add the olive oil, and then I'll add the cheese. So that way we kind of can control that bitterness. And so go ahead and turn this on. Slow drizzle on there. As soon as it starts to kind of ball up like that, you're pretty good to go. I'm going to take this. Pull it out. Spatula. Get this out into a bowl. And you can see, how beautiful and vibrant green this is. If we hadn't done the blanching, this would stay vibrant green for a little bit, but then, if you're not going to use it all, you put it in the fridge. The next day you'll come back, it's going to be gray. Still tastes okay, but so we've got that. I'm going to add some olive oil. I'm going to add a bunch of salt. Not too much salt because we've got Parmesan going in there. And you can always add more later. Some pepper. And then we'll go ahead and start by just adding about half a cup of parm. Because, your bunch of greens versus my bunch of greens, it may not end up resulting in the same amount, so we end up, we want to have, a nice balanced pesto. And again, you can always add more. Very hard to take away. Parmesan, I think we look pretty good here. It's kind of that nice pesto consistency. Give it a taste. Oh, that's great. Maybe just a little bit more oil. So, let's see. Good. This guy. Sheet pan. Sorry, on the cutting board. Let's see what we got. Nice, beautiful, wide open, extra light. It's kind of crispy on the outside. And like I said earlier, you're going to have this whole sheet pan. You can go ahead and cut it like this. If you're going to get into bread, get yourself a good bread knife. Just one that will cut bread without resistance. But here you go. You can make a sandwich with this. What I would say as far as keeping the focaccia, it'll keep for maybe almost a week. The olive oil will definitely help it from going stale too quickly. Wrap it in plastic. And then, for something like this, if you have a toaster oven, you can toast it. Or I would recommend, if you don't, getting your oven up to about 375, 400, and give it about 5 minutes, and it'll basically bring it back to life. You can also freeze it. Freezing bread, cut it into squares like this, wrap them in plastic individually, and same thing. It'll just take a few extra minutes versus the 5 minutes. Might take 10 minutes. And maybe do it at a lower oven temp because it's going to take 10 minutes. You don't want to get it too hard on the outside where you're breaking a tooth.
Bryan, we are all drooling over here. Will you show us a schmear with the pesto just to get that gorgeous green on there? And do you have a bread knife that you like? I will say our former student, Victor, wised me up to one that I think was like, I'm not lying. I think $15 on Amazon. Not to endorse Amazon, but is there one you particularly like, or what you look for in a good bread knife?
So, you know, a good bread knife, I mean, I've got a ton of them. I've got one that's like $60, but it's no better than the other ones, you know, other ones that you can pick up for $10, $15, $20. Even ones with plastic handles, no problem with that. I mean, they're like Victorinox and Mercer, those kind of brands that are known for producing knives that are not necessarily like the beautiful home decorative knife, or, you know, yeah, your chef's knife, your knife that you're going to do all that dicing with, that's the one you want to be nice. The other ones you just wanted them to be practical. So like a bread knife with a nice like vinyl handle or something like that. But this one was only $20, I think. I think I read a review about it. You know, this is one that I use for cutting like light breads like this. This one doesn't go through sourdough that great, but this one is really, really precise for cutting lighter like loaf breads or things that aren't going to fight back. But yeah, I think Mercer and Victorinox are like some good brands to look for. Fibrox, you know, they got vinyl handles and stuff. Yeah, you can definitely pick one up for $15, $20 pretty easily. Let me go ahead and tap some of this.
How's it taste? You should enjoy it for us since we only have to watch. Also, your wife is hoping that this is for lunch.
Yeah, we got a lot of bread, man. I've got another sheet pan over here that I'm dimpling out. You know, this one's gonna be ready to go in the oven in a couple hours, and then this one I'll put in the fridge. So we've got focaccia for days over here. Another thing that you can do with this is this is essentially the same recipe for like a Sicilian pizza. Or like, you know, a grandma pie. There's kind of two differences there. One, the grandma pie that's kind of famous in Brooklyn, you would put the toppings on with the raw dough. Sicilian pizza, you kind of par bake the dough. So you would cook it for about 15 minutes or so in the 450-degree oven. Take it out, tomato sauce, some mozzarella, whatever other toppings that you want to put on, and put it back in until it's done. And then you've got, so this is a very versatile recipe. Focaccia is super versatile as far as toppings that you can put on before it bakes, or toppings that you can put on like this after it bakes. So there are a couple of things that, and I can follow up too with the video and post just kind of a list of when you would want to put toppings on. There are some kind of things there are things like olives, if you want to put that in your focaccia, that you kind of want to put on at this point where we're at this stage in the dimpling of the dough, so that it kind of proofs into the dough and doesn't sit on top of the dough and burn when you cook. And then there are things like hard cheeses. Like if you wanted to put Parmesan on this, then you probably want to do it halfway through baking so it doesn't burn. So there is actually a really great list, and this recipe is kind of an amalgam of two recipes. One from Samin Nasrat, who did salt, fat. I don't know if I'm saying this in the right order, but salt, acid, fat, heat, or salt, fat, acid, heat. I believe it was the second one, the latter. Amazing book. Also has show. The show itself is on Netflix. She goes to Liguria, learns how to make the real deal focaccia.
It's pretty inspiring.
Yeah.
Well, you're almost as good, Bryan. This is almost as good. I feel a couple more tries and we'll be given Samin a run for money. They'll put us on Netflix next.
Liguria, they put us in jail for not using Ligurian olive oil and basil.
Wow. We don't want that. This has been super fun. I actually feel pretty inspired to make some focaccia. Greg's the baker in our household. My partner, Greg, but maybe I'll get my hands dirty. This has been super fun, Bryan. Maybe we'll bring you in once every month or so, and you can do another baking round with us.
Absolutely.
We haven't, I don't know that we've done buttermilk biscuits, and we know that Kentucky flour, the traditional flours here are perfect for biscuits.
Yeah, they are the absolute best biscuits. And that's, there's articles that have been written on it recently about why are biscuits better in the South. It's because our flour is better. For biscuits, yeah.
Yeah, because we know what we're doing. Amazing. Thank you to everyone who watched. Thank you for tuning in. I know we had some folks from Bryan's hometown over in Virginia Beach. Super fun. Bryan, we miss you. They've got, not to share too much news, but they've got a second baby on the way that we can't wait to say hello to. Loved it, Christy. They're at the house. And Tanya's saying in the comments she really wants you to make biscuits. So thank you so much. This looks incredible. Enjoy your lunch. I'm only mostly jealous. And thanks to Bethany, who is in the background answering questions and keeping us with the recipes. If you missed, the recipes are on our website. They're also pinned in the chat here for the focaccia and the pesto. An amazing way to, if you're, man, you don't know another way to use kale, this is a great one. One of my favorites. So without further ado, we will say so long. Make sure you turn on notifications from the Food Connection so you don't miss any of our future live streams, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, all. Thanks for joining us.